You know what's a lot more fun than thinking about how to best pay off student loans? Thinking about how rich you're going to be one day in spite of your student loans. That's why we started the Financially Free Era podcast. Financially Free Era, if you search that term on any podcast platform, you're going to find it. It's hosted by my colleague Megan McGuire over at SLP Wealth. And this podcast is where we dive deep into all the things you want to know about how to be wealthy one day. How do you best maximize tax loopholes and write-offs? How do you best invest money? How do you make smart money moves in spite of even a very large six-figure student loan balance that are going to get you where you want to be much sooner? Go follow the Financially Free Era podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. I promise you, if you like Student Loan Planners podcast, you will love Financially Free Era by SLP Wealth. Search that term, follow the show, you will love it.
Welcome to another episode of the Student Loan Planner podcast. You guys have not heard my voice on this podcast in, it's been just a little while because I did episode 400 with our fearless leader, Travis, but my name is Lauryn Williams. I'm a certified financial planner, a CSLP, and I'm one of the OG consultants at Student Loan Planner. So there was Travis, there was Rob, and then there was myself. You haven't heard from me a whole lot because I've been behind the scenes training our new consultants, kind of being the director of customer service, and I am still doing some consults. So if you haven't seen or heard from me before, hi, nice to meet you. I love it here. I've been at Student Loan Planner since 2018, and today I have a special guest, one of my favorite new consultants, new to the SLP team, but not by any means new to student loans. Janna, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Lauryn. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Janna McKay. I am an accredited financial counselor and also a CSLP, not new to student loans by any means. I've actually worked in higher education for over 20 years, specifically with loan repayment and forgiveness. I noticed that a lot of financial aid offices are willing to award the money, people get the loans, but there's not counseling on the back end as far as how to manage these loans, how to fit them into your cash flow when you have to enter repayment, and really just how to be strategic and not let these student loans drive all your decision making. And I'm just so excited to be with Student Loan Planner right now around a whole bunch of people that understand student loans because it is complicated. A lot of support here. And of course, I love working with all of you. Working with individuals or families on their student loans really just brings me a lot of joy.
I love it. I love it. I mean, I told you guys that I was the head of hiring, so you can see that I did an excellent job with Janna. No, really, she's very passionate about student loans, very knowledgeable. She's following the news on a regular basis, and she's even taught me a thing or two since coming on board. She, is doing a lot with lobbying and being on different kind of boards. Can you tell a little bit about some of the different organizations and things that you're working with as well, Janna, staying up to date with some of the latest student loan stuff?
Yeah, of course. So I do work a lot with the AAMC, which is for medical schools, as we work through these transitions with the bill that passed in July, just staying up to date on how we can best support medical students and residents and physicians. I also sit on the National PSLF Coalition, which is a lot of borrower protection groups, legal groups, different professional organizations that are really working hard to lobby for PSLF. And I would say go against the final rule that was published on Halloween as far as limiting eligibility for employers that do one of 6 things of substantial illegal activity. And so just advocating for everybody that's working in public service and being more of a voice and vocal about that.
Yeah. And I mean, that is a secret weapon that we have right there for her to be, lobbying in that direction, but also to have her ear to the ground as it relates to what's happening in regards to public service loan forgiveness. Because we also, as we'll get to in just a second, our topic for today, have some public service news for some Parent Plus borrowers. But before we get going on the topic today, told us a little bit about your background. What about your family life? Who are you personally? What are your hobbies? What are you into? Do you like long walks on the beach and reading with a cup of tea?
Oh, that's so funny. So I'm originally from Minnesota. I now lived in Portland, Oregon, which is much more mild, and I really appreciate that. I have a wife and 2 kids, 2 boys in elementary school, which definitely keeps me busy. They have so much energy. I, like you, was an athlete. I played basketball in college, not Olympic status, but still, it is my competitive nature, and that still is a big driver for me. I love cooking. I love doing different puzzles And I would just say, playing games with the kids, being outside with the kids. I think that's something really nice about where we live is even if it is raining, you can still be outside. Whereas in Minnesota, when there's a blizzard, you don't really want to be outside. So I love that. And also just traveling, new experiences, new food, new people. That is one of our top values is having those experiences together as a family.
I love it. I love it. So if I came over your house, what would you cook for me since you're saying you're a boss in the kitchen?
Okay. So my wife is Mexican and I have become a little bit more of an expert at the cuisine. We would either make tamales, which are really fun, arduous process, but really fun to make and eat and especially share. Or I would say pozole. I feel like pozole is such a comforting soup. I absolutely love it. And everybody is pleased with that one.
Ooh, I love a good pozole as well. So, yes, okay, I'm going to make my way over to Oregon so that I can eat that for dinner at some point. All right, I know you guys are ready. You're sitting on the edge of your seat because I already said the magic word, Parent Plus loans. That is the topic today. Janna and I had decided, like I said, we've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes. We're doing a lot of consultations. And this is the thing that's coming up the most. And I think it's the thing that people are most unaware of. There's a lot of people with their hair on fire related to the SAVE plan and interest ending, or it's the new year or the SAVE plan ending. There's, PSLF problems. But one thing that has kind of died down in the last few months has been Parent Plus consultations. But I think that these are the people that need to be most aware of what is relevant to their particular situation as it relates to some of the changes. So the first thing that I want to talk about as it relates to Parent Plus loans is at Student Loan Planner, we kind of coined the term double consolidation. And it was a really cool loophole that helped people get access to income-driven repayment plans that they otherwise would not have access to if they did not do this consolidation process. We have people reaching out that are saying, hey, I want to do this double consolidation thing, or I'm halfway through the double consolidation and I need some additional help. Janna, tell us why the double consolidation is no longer something that we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, of course. Since the bill passed in July, there is no longer a need to do the double consolidation because if you consolidate a single time, consolidation loans that do contain Parent Plus loans are eligible for the income contingent repayment plan and eventually the income-based repayment plan. So it all has to do with the bill that passed in July. And now, finally, the systems have been updated to allow these things to happen. And it's just going to be a much cleaner process if you don't have to consolidate multiple times. And it takes so much time as well. Each consolidation process takes at least 30 to 90 days. So if you can imagine doing that twice, it takes half a year to actually get in a good spot. So no longer the need to do that. We were talking and, all over studentaid.gov, there's this yellow box that pops up every once in a while that does prompt people to consolidate. Really do your research and see if that's necessary.
Yeah, really do your research. And so we are, like I said, today is all things Parent Plus, but I'm going to pause here and say that's also a public service announcement for those of you that don't have Parent Plus loans. Regular people pretty much do not need to consolidate their loans right now because what it results in is you erasing your payment history. Because when you consolidate your loans, you create a completely new loan. Like if you've been paying on loans for the last 6 years and now you've consolidated the loans last week, that 6 years is gone and you're at square one and you're going to be starting going forward with the payment history. That is different from the Parent Plus borrowers. You do need to consolidate your loans and you need to consolidate your loans urgently before June 30th. Your loan has to be dispersed and done before that date. Otherwise, you're not going to get access to this IBR plan that we're talking about. And so just to break it down, because I know some of you are avid listeners and you know this like the back of your hand, but there are some newbies probably here. Parent Plus loans are only eligible for one income-driven repayment plan right now, and it's called ICR. And so ICR stands for Income Contingent Repayment. However, because of the new bill, everybody who has Parent Plus loans will be able to get on this income contingent repayment plan, make one payment, and then they'll be able to move to IBR, which was the whole point of the double consolidation anyway, was moving to a different payment plan that was going to be better than ICR. ICR is planning to go away completely. And that's why they're allowing people to move to IBR in the future. So you just need to be mindful that if you have Parent Plus loans, it is definite that you need to consolidate. If you have already consolidated, to Janna's point, you do not need to consolidate again. You will only have ICR until you make one payment on ICR, and then you will be able to move to IBR. And the coolest thing is, like, I actually didn't know this, why I'm telling you I love Janna, that they've done it. We've seen it actually happen. So if you've made that one payment on ICR, as of the new year, we've been seeing people move to IBR that have not done the double consolidation. Is that accurate, Janna?
Yeah, I actually had someone last week that was making payments in the income contingent repayment plan, submitted their application for the IBR, and in a matter of 4 days, which is kind of a miracle processing time at this point, they got their payment lowered by $600 by moving into the IBR, because typically, the ICR is a higher monthly payment than the IBR. Again, most circumstances.
Yeah, which this is a really big deal, because we thought this wasn't going to happen until July of 2026 at the earliest. And it was like, they haven't really said anything like, oh, we're ready and we're doing this, we're implementing it. But they are actually doing it, which brings me to another thing that we've been seeing a lot. We got quite a few clients that had letters this week that said you were denied for your IDR plan. So they signed up for like IBR or pay as you earn or something because they did the double consolidation. They're also catching those in the system now. And they're saying, nope, you're not eligible because you've not made a payment on ICR. I initially thought like, oh no, they messed this up. You don't have to do this. But yeah, like we said, we just saw it. If you make the one payment on ICR, you can then move to IBR right away. And so key pieces of the language is that if you go to the OBB update website on studentaid.gov, they say that you do need to consolidate and have your loan fully dispersed by June 30th, but you don't need to have made this payment on ICR by June 30th in order to still be able to get access to IBR. So how does that play itself out? You're one of the people who waits to the last minute. They disperse your loan on June 29th. Glory be to God, you made it through the fire, but you're like, oh man, I didn't get to sign up for ICR yet. I'm going to get booted. You're not going to be booted. You do still need to sign up for ICR, make that one payment, and then you'll be able to move over to IBR. And that doesn't matter if it happens after July of 2026. So I hope I broke that down. Janna, is there anything I need to do to kind of close the gap on that part of the Parent Plus conversation?
I would just say, plan on doing this sooner than later. If the consolidation can take up to 90 days, we would want to get the consolidation application in before the end of March, just to make sure that there aren't any delays. Because in the off chance that your loan does disperse July 1st of 2026 or after, you are not eligible, I should just say, for any of the income-driven repayment plans, and therefore forgiveness under any of those plans. So that is going to be really important. And to one of my earlier points, ICR is typically a higher monthly payment. It is shocking sometimes. If you need to use a forbearance and temporarily postpone payments for a couple of months so that you can save up and make that single payment in the ICR plan in order to move into the IBR, that is okay. It is just a short-term strategy to make sure that you can make that payment without stretching things too thin so that you can move on to a more affordable payment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. In closing, as we get done with the consolidation piece of this Parent Plus podcast, you do need to consolidate if you have Parent Plus loans. You need to consolidate sooner rather than later, before June 30th, and you do not need to do a double consolidation anymore. We've got the consolidation piece of the puzzle down. So now we're going to talk through some scenarios of things that we've been seeing with Parent Plus borrowers to kind of illustrate some of the other things and changes that were happening. So Janna, I know you had somebody recently get denied for a consolidation, the kind of transition. So I said we were done talking about consolidation, but we're done talking about that part of consolidation. So tell us what happened with this client.
Yeah, we met the other week. They submitted 3 separate consolidation applications over the course of the last year, 2 electronic, 1 paper. They had all but 1 loan consolidated. So they were just trying to wrap things up, get this final loan consolidated, but their application was denied every single time, just saying the loan's not eligible. The loan's not eligible. And there was really no clear indication of why it wasn't eligible, because it's a Parent Plus loan. On paper, it looks like it is. Come to realize that this specific Parent Plus loan was set up into two different disbursements. So there was a disbursement for fall semester and there was a disbursement for the spring semester. So one happened in September. And what this client did was the right thing. They consolidated it after that fall disbursement. But since there was a subsequent disbursement in the spring term that happened in January, it is the exact same loan. And when they went to fill out their consolidation application these last couple times, the reason it couldn't be consolidated is because that loan ID has one loan ID regardless of how many disbursements, but it was already showing as consolidated. So even though another disbursement came out, the loan itself was showing as consolidated, and that's why it kept getting denied. When we checked with Aidvantage to see what could they possibly do, their hands were tied and they said that the loan servicer that holds the loan is supposed to notify them when something like that happens in a proactive way. I just think we can all be realistic about loan servicers being proactive right now, and maybe do your diligence and double check on that and just be your own best advocate and really get to the understanding of why would something be denied? How do I make this right and get this included? Because this specific person is working toward PSLF, and if we don't get that into the consolidation loan, they're just going to have to pay that one outright.
Wow, that's a tough case. And that's something that's, like you said, something that you really need to look into to know, hey, what in the world happened here? I don't understand why this isn't working out perfectly. But this is where you need to advocate for yourself. And this is the biggest thing that I want to drive home for Parent Plus borrowers today is you can't stick your head in the sand. You can't wait. And you have to understand what's going on so that you can say, hey, hold up, wait a second. I need someone to fix this. Fill out a feedback form, fill out something with the CFPB. I don't know if they're actually still operating. Haven't heard anybody get a response from them recently, but it was a great place to go before. But you definitely need to try everything because your long-term payment history and what you're able to do with your student loans matters as it relates to what these people do or don't do, as it relates to what is their job within the Department of Education. So yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I have one that I want to talk about related to public service loan forgiveness. So one of the things that's been hardest for me lately is delivering the bad news to clients that if you borrow after July of 2026 additional Parent Plus loans, all of your loans will be moved to the new payment plan that's only going to be available for people who borrow after July of 2026. You're not going to have any of the old payment plans available to you. So what does that mean? Right now, we just talked about all this consolidation to get on ICR, to get on IBR. If you take out one loan after July 1st of 2026, all of that is out of the window. The only thing you're going to be eligible for is the standard repayment plan based on the amount of debt that you have. And that is a big deal because, one, a lot of people are going to have to pay their loans back and they were planning on going for forgiveness. But two, if you are going for public service loan forgiveness, you're also losing access to it. And so the case that I just saw recently, there was a wife that was on track for public service loan forgiveness. She only had 5 years to go, and they decided to take all the loans in the husband's name. And so I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. It's great because the husband doesn't have any loans, but their plan was the husband's going to be able to work a little bit longer. He's going to, kind of fall on the sword for the children. I'm going to finish out these 5 years of public service. And then he's also working in a public service job, and he's going to do public service for the children so that they can all, get the education that they need. Well, a couple of problems with that. There won't be an opportunity for him to go for public service loan forgiveness because he needs to borrow well after 7 of 2026 in order to get all of his kids through school. So he has his current child who can borrow based on the old rules, not an unlimited amount of money, but he's not limited to the current borrowing limits for Parent Plus borrowers that starts as of July of 26. So they can take out a lot of debt for that one child that is currently in school, but they're not going to be able to pay it back using public service loan forgiveness because that child will not be done with school before 7 of 2026. Then they have 2 more kids that are coming down the pipeline. And those 2 children will have to borrow based on the new rules, which is, was it $20,500 per year, Janna, right? And then $65,000 total over the course of their education program. Problem number 1, it's a very little amount, $65,000 total per student that you can take. Problem number 2, is that this is, like I said, none of it is going to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And they've got 3 children they need to pay for their education. So what do? We talked about using their 529 plans strategically. The 529 plans didn't have enough to fund any of these children's education, which of course was why they booked the consultation. But we talked about maybe using that for student loan repayment in the future, or switching beneficiaries as an option so that the parents could use it as for student loan repayment. We, of course, are hoping that PSLF comes back. This is where, like I said, having Janna on that council, she's getting kind of the behind the scenes talk, and she's being able to advocate on behalf of people like this. But if it doesn't come back, we need to try to minimize their balance. And so this gentleman is 50. He'll be 60 when his last child finishes college. And we could just kind of stretch this out over a longer period of time. But, do we take on a bunch of private debt? What are our options as it relates to, a situation like this? And so, Janna, what are you thinking as you're listening to me talk about this?
I think it's just a tough call, right? So part of this coalition, we talk about the new standard repayment plan being tiered based on how much debt you have, anywhere from 10 to 25 years. That was not included in the language of being an eligible plan for PSLF. Was it an oversight? I don't know. But we are bringing it up and making sure that people know on the Hill that this is going to be an issue, and we shouldn't exclude Parent Plus borrowers from different programs. I also think if we've seen this pendulum swing, who's to say that things couldn't change going forward, right? But I just think it's about doing the best that you can. It's about protecting yourself and being diligent. If you're looking at private loans versus federal loans, you are going to want to know what protections you have as a borrower. And that's the world that we're going to with changes coming July 1st, is being really strong, educated consumers on trying to do the right thing with these loans.
100%. And so what we ended up doing is deciding that it was still better for him to take out federal loans versus private loans, which is going to be the case for a lot of borrowers. Like I said, they're going to have to stop borrowing federal to kind of stop the bleeding right now and, not want to take on that risk, and then start borrowing private going forward. But in his case, he had nothing to lose by keeping all the loans federal, because he's going to be able to kind of kick the can down the road. Hopefully PSLF comes back online for him as an option. And then, like I said, when he's 60 and he, has to start paying these loans back, even over the 25 years, he'll be 85 before, the standard plan works itself out. You still get the protection of, if you die, the loans die with you within the federal system. So there were still benefits to taking on this debt as a federal balance versus piling all this onto him as private debt. But if his wife, remember I told you she was 5 years into PSLF, if they had decided to borrow in her name, or he wasn't around, I would have had to tell her to stop borrowing, because she was putting at risk I think it was $300,000-$400,000 of PSLF, or loans that she had that were 5 years into PSLF. And so imagine if she took out a loan in July of 2026 and she wasn't able to finish PSLF on what she already had 5 years for, and now she had all this other debt that she took on for her children. That would be a horror story. And that's what I want people to be aware of, is we don't know what's coming down the pipeline. Like I said, people are advocating on your behalf, but as it's written right now, it's really possible that PSLF is not going to be an option for Parent Plus borrowers. All right, I know we're starting to sound a little bit grim, but it's all because we want you to know, be educated, and be able to advocate for yourself. So scenario number 3, Janna, tell us a little bit about the other thing that you've encountered.
So all Parent Plus loans, not consolidated. They wanted to do the double consolidation and wanted help. And, the reality is, we come back to the very beginning of our conversation, right? You only have to consolidate a single time in order for eligibility for the IBR to open up, in order to have this loan be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. And this specific person, that ICR payment was really high, in over $2,000. And that's where we came to the conclusion: a forbearance for 4 months, save $500 a month, which would be a typical monthly payment. Get off the forbearance, make the payment, and then you can get on your way in the IBR and work toward PSLF. Just emphasizing what we already have done. But there are so many scenarios like this.
That's a pretty cool one as well to just be thinking through. I feel like there's so many different options as it relates to, like you said, what could happen and how your life plays out. The other thing that comes up too is thinking about just when you have a bunch of different kids. I know sometimes I do a consultation and someone will get on and they'll say, well, the kids are responsible for this. I took the debt out on their behalf, but the kids are responsible for paying it back. When you end up in situations like that, there's a few different options. Well, here's what the payment's going to be based on the parent's income. We could add it up and divide it by the 4 kids that are there. Or we can say, well, Johnny took on 50% of the debt and Jane took on 20% of the debt and Bobby took on 10, or, so on and so forth, and divide it up proportionally. But it gets a little bit complicated if you're thinking about how to manage the payments with Parent Plus debt and there's multiple children and you're asking the kids to be responsible for the payment. So, Janna, what are some different strategies you can do if you're a parent who's wanting your children to be responsible for the payment?
Great question. Like you said, the payment is always based on the parent's income, which I think is really important. And we always talk about being strategic with how you file taxes when you are a married couple. That is important. What you can do if you have multiple kids and they are responsible is proportionally divide up that payment. Figure out who borrowed how much of the overall total of the consolidation loan, and they're going to get on the same timeline. The pitfall of this is typically kids don't enter repayment at the same time or graduate at the same time. So one might be further ahead on the loans than somebody else. So there has to be some sort of agreement in place or understanding of how that works. The other thing, Lauryn, that we've talked about is when you do have multiple kids and you consolidate the loans, and let's say that child is still in school, consolidation does put people into repayment right away. So it's not like keeping the Parent Plus loan by itself, where the deferment status is based on that specific kid's enrollment history. So if they're enrolled at least half time, they're going to continue to have deferment and postponement of payments on the Parent Plus loan. As soon as you consolidate, that loan is no longer tied to the child or their enrollment, and it goes into repayment right away. So that's another important thing to factor. For example, if you have a kid that has a year left, but you don't want the disbursement on or after July 1st, so you're consolidating, expect to go into repayment right away on that.
Oh, that brings up a good one for me. I just had this situation recently. A gentleman is in school finishing up his degree, and he has 3 different children that he has borrowed for, and he's done a consolidation for 2 of them, and then there's one that's still in school. And so he's currently in school deferment because he's in school. And so when we were talking through the different scenarios and what to do, what we ended up with was the same sort of situation. There's a daughter that is not going to be done by July of 2026. So he's going to stop borrowing for her and take on private student loan debt for the remainder of her education, or look for scholarships for her. We talked about work study as options. And that's another key piece of the puzzle here is we're telling you kind of what could be sad news for borrowers, but in the vein of advocating for yourself, think of creative ways to be able to get your child through school if they're already started a program that they want to stay at, or if they're thinking about going to school, okay, let's do an associate's degree. Let's do 2 years of community college before we get going. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have the degree from, 4-year university XYZ, even if they did 2 years of an associate degree. So now is the time. Maybe good parenting is telling them not this year for this school, or work study is going to have to be a thing, because the only other option is, like I said, taking on this private debt. And the private debt would be in the name of the child. Yes, parents can take on private debt, but it would be in the form of just a regular personal loan. It's not a private student loan. And so that's something else you need to be thinking about. If you're just taking on private debt and they don't, you could use it to buy a car, buy a house, buy a motorcycle, buy a fancy diamond ring for your, it's just any kind of debt. It comes with an interest rate that says hey, there's no collateral to go with this thing. And so you're taking that on as a parent, and that's something you need to think about. But on the flip side of that is putting this into your child's name and now having your child take on that private debt. Well, the child is in school for an undergraduate degree. We know that the value of the undergraduate degree is not the same as it used to be. So what are they going to do when they get out of school? And the private companies are thinking about this. So while they're taking on a private student loan, it could come with a 13 or 14. I've seen up to 20% interest rates on private student loans. It looks just like a credit card. And so do you want to strap your child with that just for them to be able to continue on at fancy school XYZ? Or would you rather your child graduate and be in a lower debt situation because they either had to change schools or they had to pick up a work study or they spent the summer, applying for scholarships? We've got to be creative. We got to think outside the box. And like I said, for me, sometimes, like you said, we make these sacrifices as parents for our children, or we say we're making these, but the sacrifice may be the tough love parenting that says, I don't want you in debt for the rest of your life. I don't want you to have to dig your way out of a 13% interest rate on $160K of debt. And so here's what we're going to do instead. I know I went on a little bit of a tangent. This, like I said, the gentleman was in school. He had kids that were done and had consolidated the loans for those kids. And then he had one that he needed to borrow for. And that was led me off on my tangent. But because he had consolidated the one set of loans, when he gets out of school, he's going to go immediately into repayment. And that's what we talked about, was this idea that, like, just because the kids still have, or the one daughter still has school, these loans will not be staying in deferment. And it's also urgent that he consolidate the one that was recently dispersed so that it can be eligible for IBR, because he was also a person who was qualified for public service loan forgiveness. So it was consolidate the one that was left over. You will not be getting any deferment, even though your children are in school. So as soon as you get out of school, get ready to pay. And also figure out a way to borrow the rest of the money, because it makes sense to get PSLF on this big part of the loan that you have. And it was $441,000, by the way. And then another $160 that he needed to borrow, that I said that they're going to have to take on in a private manner if they don't find scholarships or something like that. So I thought that was a really good case.
The other thing that I do want to mention when you do have multiple kids is, if you don't want to consolidate everything together, you can consolidate them separately. So you can have more than one consolidation loan. Of course, it still shows up as one monthly payment, but if it's easier to keep the kids' debt separate, it can be done separately. The hard part is you can only do one online consolidation application every 180 days. So if that would be the case, it would probably be an online application and one or more paper applications if you've never consolidated before.
Yeah, really good point about the online application. That piece of the puzzle, a lot of people are not aware of that. So then it's like, you're back to the paper application. They're like, and then people's little ears go up. They're like, oh, paper application, that means double consolidation, right? No. We're just talking about regular. But like I said, that also complicates the situation. And to the point of what we talked about earlier, why the double consolidation is not something we're recommending is because consolidations take time. The main thing that you want to be mindful of, if you want to separate your kids' loans and do this, like you said, various consolidation process, is that it could take more time. Time may be the thing that kind of bites us in the butt, because we've all sat through the government shutting down, the SAVE program shutting down, coming back online, stopping again, all of COVID. I got probably 50 more examples that, like I said, I don't need to tell you because we've all just lived through them. But, the system is not very dependable right now. And so while consolidation opportunities are open today, something crazy could happen and it's shut down for a month. And now all of a sudden we're waiting and everybody is, the pipeline is clogged up with people who are trying to consolidate before the deadline because they couldn't for some period of time for some random reason. And so I'm saying that to say, be alert, be awake, get ready, and don't drag this out any longer than necessary, because like I said, it will be to your detriment if a consolidation is dispersed after June 30th of 2026. We do not know what is coming down the pipeline, or we have some ideas. And like I said, none of it is good, even though some of those things could change. You want to be on the front end. You want to be prepared, and you want to have the flexibility to be able to pivot, should you need to. So do not delay in getting your consolidations done. Janna, what else are you thinking? What else did we not tell the people? I feel like we gave them a good bit of information. We've run through 4 scenarios already. We talked a lot about consolidation and the new process for that. If you are a Parent Plus borrower in 2026, what else do they need to know?
The other thing that I want to clarify, we said $20,500 for the annual limit starting July 1st. It's actually $20,000. So I just want to make sure that we have that right. We didn't really talk about legacy provisions, right? So if you have students and you've already borrowed Parent Plus and they still have school left and you are planning to continue to borrow for them, it will be under a legacy provision for the next 3 years. So they do have to be at the same school and program and continue on in that. But if you've borrowed before this July 1st deadline, you will continue to have borrowing limits at the current rules. So no limit, essentially, except for what's up to the cost of attendance at the school. But if you have a new student that gets their first disbursement on or after July 1st, then it's under these new regulations of the $20,000 per year and the $65,000 per student.
Yeah, really good point. And I talked about a little bit, I kind of dropped a nugget when I was talking about my case study that the gentleman that had the two boys, like there was one kid that already borrowed based on the old rules and there's two more that need to borrow. And so part of the strategy that we came up with for them was to take out as much as possible for the kid that can borrow and then hold on to that money, in case you need to take on private debt for the other children, because they probably will inevitably take on some federal debt for those children. But in figuring out like what to do, at least you have a big bucket of money that you can kind of deploy as needed by borrowing as much as possible for the kid that does have that accessibility. So that's another thing, is strategizing related if you have multiple children on how to kind of minimize your overall debt.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. And another client that I had, we had the situation very similar to yours where one parent had borrowed thus far, but the kid did have one more year of school. And so if the mom continued to borrow and got the disbursement after July 1st, that impacts all of the Parent Plus loans that she's borrowed thus far. So that decision was parent number 2 is going to borrow, but we wanted to make sure to get that first disbursement in this current time frame. So to get it in the spring term or winter term, if they're on terms or on semesters, it was just important to get the legacy provision. So we're switching parent borrowers in the middle of this financial aid year to make sure that they can fall under the legacy provision of no limits to finish the current kid through school. It's tricky.
Ooh, that is another really good scenario. And as I said, this is where you have to be on your toes, because it's like, what do we do? What is going to make the most sense for our family? And that's perfect. Like you said, the other one was too far ahead. Like that was going to ruin it for one parent. But for the other parent, he's like, even if we have to pay this back, it's all over here in this person's name. It doesn't mess up what the other person has going on. We can think about, like you said, if we have to use that standard plan or, something else comes available in the future. But also we got the legacy provision so we can take out what we need to be able to have the private debt to worry about. I love that.
Yeah. I think with these examples, I just want to be conscious that it is a privilege to have a 2-parent household. So there is also the option of, if you are legally adopted by somebody else, they can also borrow on your behalf. And there could also be an endorser. Like there are so many situations with Parent Plus loan because they're credit based that it's just really important to look into the options and know all of them.
100%. I feel like we've done a really good job of, like you said, laying out some different options, some different scenarios, and helping people understand exactly what's coming down the pipeline as it relates to the OBBB and the new changes coming down for 2026 or July of 2026 specifically. If you're looking for a student loan consultation, if you're one of the people who has these Parent Plus loans and trying to figure out what to do, you guys know where to find us. It is studentloanplanner.com. Simple, straight to the point. We are going to be in the upcoming weeks throwing out some blogs and some YouTube videos and things like that with this similar information, because, we're trying to keep you all as educated as possible. But right now, the simplest thing to do to kind of be able to navigate this is book a consultation and have us walk you through kind of what is the right of all these crazy scenarios based on your particular situation, and how can we optimize student loan repayment based on the fact that you are an awesome parent who's trying to figure out how to pay for your child's education, and they've just made it a little bit more complicated for you to be able to do that. So any closing words, Janna?
No, I think we just summed it up really well. This is a complicated topic, but like Lauryn said, we would love to work with you if it feels like you just need a second opinion on what to do or different direction or explore all of the options. We really are here to support you through this, because it is not easy to figure out what the right thing is right now.
All right. We will see you all next time. Like I said, we're always in the background, so next time might be a while from now. But Janna and I are ready to serve you as consultants. And like I said, I am happy to help you from behind the scenes as well.
Are you on the free Student Loan Planner email list? If yes, you can upgrade your experience and discover student loan loopholes so good, they might get repealed if I talk about them publicly. Find out my very best thought leadership that I really just can't be super open about anymore, unfortunately. If you want to get our very best tips, not just the ones that I can share for free, go to studentloanplanner.com/insider to get a special discount for your year membership. That's studentloanplanner.com/insider and get our very best dozens of bonus content and tips that's going to save you money and get you out of student debt faster. And if you're already an SLP insider, please reply back to those emails and let me know how I can make it even more valuable.